Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and boy, this one should be fun, so tuck in. So during the last Warhammer Weekly, I went on a bit of a fun rant. I'll link the exact point of starting point of my rant down below. There was a lot of hay that's been made over the last week and a half over this matched play system. And I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought about how I want to address it. And what this is this video is sort of an expansion of some of the concepts that I touched upon in the off the top of my head rant during last week's Warhammer Weekly. So, if you want to watch that first, like I said, that's linked down below. So I'll give you a second. There you go. Welcome back. Time changed for you, not for me. And so I want to talk about the idea of meritocracy when it comes to these things, when it comes to ways to play the game, and the nature of points in this matched play, and kind of what it means for the future of Age of Sigmar. So, here we go. Alright, so let's talk first about giving up. So, I put quotations around these, but they're really paraphrases, because I'm a liar. I'll tell you right now, they're not exact quotes from any one person. But I've heard these sorts of three ideas very succinctly put in multiple videos. That basically the reason this matched play is coming out is because Age of Sigmar can't work without points. Sort of this dream of a new system, this bold new direction failed, and that this goes against the basic idea of the Age of Sigmar. I don't agree with any of that. I really don't. I don't see anything greatly different here. I know Age of Sigmar can work without points because lots of people play that way. I don't know if enough people play that way to make the game profitable. I don't have an answer on that, and I would strongly suspect none of you watching do either, unless who you are as you're watching this happens to be someone in the upper echelons of Games Workshop's financial departments. We don't know. We never know these things. They don't share to that level of detail. So, I making that leap, that assumption with 100% confidence is crazy town to me. I don't know what their sales numbers look like, and I'm not going to try to base anything off of what I don't know. What I do know is that, and I know for sure, is that lots of people play without points. I know that. The other thing I know for sure is that since the inception of the game, they have constantly produced alternate ways to play, alternate rule sets, in individual scenarios that change victory conditions at a simple level, up to big, massive things like the Time of War, which just injected whole new rules into every game. They've had ongoing campaigns through the Quest for Gal Maraz thing. There's just been a lot of different things put out there to play this game. Path to Glory is another one that comes to mind, where you build up like your Chaos Warband or whatever. Okay, so over the past year, we have gotten lots of different bolt-on systems. If you've been watching my videos, you know I talk about this a lot. And guess what? Strap in, I'm going to talk about it more in a couple slides. But the central tenet to me that they have pushed is play this game how you want. That's the right way to play. And I see that same message continuing with this book. Because if this book was simply the points guide for Age of Sigmar, okay, if that's what was being published, then maybe I would agree. But it's three different modes of play. And you can say, well, the other two don't matter. They're not as important. I don't know that. I don't know what's more important. I know what a lot of people are excited about the points, and I completely understand that. For 100 good reasons, it's a valid option. It was one that was lacking in an official capacity. But the idea that it's there as this complete course correction is silly to me. Not just least of which is because this book had to start being worked on 6 months ago. And we had rumors of it 6+ months ago being worked on. So they wouldn't have had the financial data. Like, books don't work like that. Companies of that size don't work like that. You have design teams that go through iterations. You have development. You have testing. It's a lengthy process. So, yeah. It's just not, like, those viewpoints just, I can't find the reality they're grounded in. Okay? So that's my thoughts on that. All right, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So we're getting an official point system from Games Workshop, amongst the two other things that are in this book. But the reality is that it's not like points are some radically new concept, of course. I mean, obviously they existed in every previous edition, and the reality is there's been almost no break. If you wanted to play Age of Sigmar with some form of mechanical point structure, I would say from 2 weeks after the launch of the game... Nope, I'm going to take that back. From the day of the launch of the game, you've had an option. Because initially people were just doing simple wound stuff and counting. And that didn't work, and it took a couple weeks to refine down. And I literally mean a couple weeks when I first started seeing things like these systems I've listed here, right? And then those got refined and shaped and stuff like that. And so over the past year, you've seen SDK and South Coast GT, Clash, and Aether all have, various levels of popularity. They were all put out there. People got to use them for tournaments. People got to use them for their home games. People got to evaluate them, give feedback. All of that happened. So it's always been there. The only difference is the person producing the content. And I'm not sure that that's... it's nice. It makes it easier for a newer player to get their hands on, which is good. But as an experienced player, I don't know that there's any innate value to that. I believe in community alterations to games. And in general, I feel that having X thousands of playtesters is going to always produce a stronger result than X tens of playtesters, which is what internal game design tends to rely on, right? And so I've often heard people say the game is unfinished if we have to make the points. Like, they didn't even put out a whole game. Well, no, that's not actually the definition of a game, even a war game. There are many historical games that do not include points. Points are not, and that kind of like army building mechanism are not necessarily part of a game. There is a army building method in there. So they gave you a method that I would say is required. You have to have some way to know what you're supposed to put on the table, which they did. So there we go. We've satisfied the minimum criteria. But to me, what I would say is we spent years as a community complaining about the points and their balance. We rewrote them over and over again. We changed points around. This costs this much. This army gets this many extra points. This unit actually costs this. All these secondary comp systems. We changed it all over the place as we see fit. Or saw fit, I suppose. And, we're engaged in a massive community project right now to redefine sort of 8th edition into a new edition. And a lot of good work was put into that. And I don't think anybody would attack, or at least I wouldn't. I shouldn't say anybody. I'm sure people will. I would never attack the 9th Age for not being valid in some way because it's a community project. It most certainly is, right? It's got a lot of smart people doing a lot of good work, which is how I would evaluate the strength of a project. Is the product quality? And so what I would say is, don't we want our own game experience? Like, don't we want to be able to shape it? And I'm happy to see that they are bringing in the community to help shape this, as was very recently popularized. We had a lot of community involvement from things like Heel and Hammer and stuff, from Heel and Hammer, Bad Dice, and Face Hammer, which we'll go to on the next slide. So let's talk about Meritocracy. Okay. As I said, they probably started working on this book 6 months ago. And in that time, as they're working, in that intervening time, there's people running tourneys, games, commenting online, etc. And I think, hopefully, all of that helped to shape the product. I don't know that. I hope that. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. What I do know is that some of the people who've been leading the charge on sort of the competitive style of play of this game, Heel and Hammer, Face Hammer, and Bad Dice, as previously mentioned, were brought in to offer review, critique, and consult during what I would call the UAT phase, because they mentioned in the podcast that when they show up, there was effectively a book there, right? So what that tells me is that, that we already had a fair amount of work done. If the scenarios are there and stuff like that, there was a book of some kind, right? And not so much that it's been, it's gold stamped yet or whatever. Like, it's not the first final. But it's been produced through, let's say, some design and development stages. And I've got to think that if they're doing that, MC1 Gamers also mentioned that people had been reaching out to him, or to the sort of the TO organizers, and they had been giving input as well. So it sounds like I'm not a TO organizer. I have no insight into that. I hope that's all accurate, and they were reaching out to lots of tournament organizers in the community, talking about what they enjoyed, what were the elements of the games and the tournaments that they ran that did well, what were the challenges, etc., and incorporated that kind of thought into the book. Again, I don't know how much they did. I don't know how much of it's going to be influenced, but I like the idea that this book has evolved as part of a meritocracy. And what I mean by that is I will take right here the controversial stance that I think it was right not to release points right away, but to instead give us an open toolkit, a sandbox, a simple base from which to start, and then watch us, right? As though we're sort of guinea pigs running around in a lab, and they can see what we do. And then they learn from that and release the bolt-on systems. And I've been talking about this forever. I went back and actually listened to some of my earlier videos today to make sure I wasn't full of it. And I very directly say in some of those videos shortly after the game launched last year that if I was them, because I'm starting from this simple base, I would bolt on other systems. You could bolt on, fuller siege battles and point systems and whatever else you want. By the way, I hope this isn't the last bolt-on we see. I want to see a ton more of these. Okay? I want to see a ton of these different books get released. Different ways to take things, different ways to build, and sort of different modes to play in. I think that sounds fantastic. Because we do have that simple base, we can morph it all over the place around to what we need by laying extra structure on top of it. And that all seems like a good thing to me, because it gives me more ways to keep my game fresh every week. I can decide to do something different. And that leads to my final point, that the idea that one playstyle, this has been something else that's come up a bit, the idea that one playstyle will become dominant is silly. And by that I mean the fear that it will become dominant is silly. It may. I'm not saying that it won't. Hardly. I'm positive one will become dominant, as a matter of fact. But if it does, it's because we, the community, chose it. In a sort of like market, we've made a choice between competing ideas and through meritocracy chosen the one we like. We weren't forced. We played points in 8th edition and the nature of the way the game was played because those were the rules in the book. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Anybody who says, and this has been mentioned on a couple of videos, you could have always just stripped the points out and played however you want. Well, yes, that is technically true. Okay? But that's technically true in the way that saying, like, you could just pick up and move to any part of the country you want. Yes, true. I can. I could go move to Colorado or California or anywhere, anytime I wanted. There's no legal barriers to me doing so. I could leave tomorrow. But there's a lot of other barriers, right? Some real, some psychological, of packing up my stuff, hiring a moving company, finding a house, not wanting to leave people behind, all these sorts of things that also influence your decision. And in the same way, it's much harder to remove rules than it is to add them. We love adding rules. I mentioned this in a previous video. The compacts and such that we added over time were all rules additions. As gamers, it's in our blood to want to add rules. It's fun. It's fun to add on some crazy other rules. It's hard to strip them out. And even if you don't have a problem with it, getting a larger section of the community to agree to do that and having enough people to play a game with is especially challenging. So whatever becomes dominant is hopefully the one that wins in a meritocratic fashion, or it wins on merit, I guess would be the simpler way to say it. So I don't know that that's a bad thing. And those other ones still exist. So if I and my small group want to simply, like as I said on the show and still agree with, I'm most excited about the campaign. We've played a lot of campaigns previously with the General's Compendium. In my little microcosm of a meta, that's the type of thing we love. So for me, that will probably be the dominant playstyle because that's what wins here. But when I go to a tournament, I'm going to assume that we're using matched play and there's points. I'm sure they won't all do that. Some will also do some different stuff. And that's great too. And it's been said that more options are not a bad thing. I don't agree with that. You can sometimes have a problem with too many options. But I think we're a long way away from the paradox of choice here. So, to repeat myself again, a simple system is an advantage because you can build anything on top of it. It's easy to add complexity, restrictions. It's nearly impossible to take them away. This release of matched play is not surprising. It is, to me, simply the fruition of everything that has been promised and everything that has been done since the release of this game a year ago. That does not mean, however, that this is all perfect. And here's where I want to really get to the big failure. I myself, the day before the points came out, said I don't think the announcement would be points. I'll be very honest. And that's because the communication has been a failure here. Now, accepting that as I'm talking about this, we know this book is coming 3 months before it actually happens. Which is farther in advance than we've known about, basically, for sure, any product in a long time. So clearly there is movement, and that's a good thing. But what we do have here is a failure to communicate, right? GW has been moving in the direction of open dialogue, but that would have been way better way earlier. Because they could have said at an early point, ironically, they could have said at an earlier time, look, we're thinking about bolt-on systems for this game. It's something we want to add. We may do points at a point in time, or create different rules for matched play. But we want to see what you do and work with you to find the right answer. Right? That could have been an open dialogue. And if it was, I think that would have gone a long way. Because in the absence of having that answer, people just assumed it would never happen and got frustrated. And that's completely reasonable. When I say I think it's a good thing that there were no points at the very launch of the game, I mean that because it did give us a chance to explore and think about how we would do it and how we would want the game to play. The downside is we thought we were doing that because that's the only option. We didn't know that there was some other thing coming, and that's a real failure. Right? Because in the end, we could have been more synergistic and we could have produced stronger, we could have produced maybe even a stronger book or situation than we're in now with more involvement. So I do lament that. Final slide, closing points. The Warhammer Utubs. My final point is this. This is my favorite picture I've ever owned. I have a good friend who doesn't play Warhammer, and I asked him for a cover image, and he jokingly sent me this for the Warhammer Utubs, playing with our precious miniatures figurines. Sorry, I'm just laughing looking at it. So I truly love this picture, and the jokey nature of it is this. In the end, let's all remember that it's a game. We play with little plastic figures. That doesn't mean that this is meaningless. As I've covered in previous videos, it means a lot. But it's also our little funny game we play with where we push around our little dollies. So let's have a good time. Let's reserve our judgment until this book comes out. And when it does, let's take a look. Let's find what we like. Let's use that. Let's give it all a good test. Take it through the paces. And, if we as a community, in the largest sense, decide there are things we want to change, then let's not hold back at changing them. because in the end, this is our game and our experience, and we own that. And as we push around our little precious moments, we get to decide ultimately the amount of fun in the game that we want to have together. So there you go. All right, so that's my thoughts on all of this. I hope that you enjoyed it. I very much look forward to your thoughts below. As always, the dialogue to me is the most important thing, so don't hesitate to leave your comments below. Like it if you like it. And as always, we'll see you next time.